These videos will show you how I mod my Arcade1Up cabinets. I use a PC inside instead of a Raspberry Pi. The main reason for that is I want the extra power. It's necessary to use a decent PC to run games like Killer Instinct 1 and 2. The plan is to give you a crash course on setting up MAME, preparing your PC, installing new controls, installing your PC in the cabinet, and then fine-tuning your settings at the end. Some of these steps may not apply to your build, and I will do my best to give you alternative information. Warning: some of these mods require you to make irreversible changes to your Arcade1Up cabinet. There are a lot of steps in this process. You will need basic PC skills, and some experience working on electronics is helpful. Follow these instructions at your own risk. Start by preparing your PC software to be sure you can successfully set this up before tearing apart your Arcade1Up cabinet. If you fail at this part, you'll have fresh parts but no games in your cabinet. I'm certainly not an expert when it comes to setting up MAME, but I will do my best walkthrough. I'm going to keep it as simple as possible. First, it's best you start with a fresh Windows install. That way there's no bloatware installed by the manufacturer, potential malware, and other stuff slowing down the PC. This should be a dedicated computer for your cabinet, meaning you don't want this thing to be running double duty. This needs to run only for your Arcade1Up cabinet. If you have the means, do a clean install of Windows, update it, and then start this process. Here is the simplest description of MAME I can give you. This software emulates arcade hardware. It primarily uses your processor to do all of the work. Your video card won't matter much, so use a PC with a decent processor over a PC with a decent video card. There are many different versions of MAME. I use MAME 0.139. It's very important that you use ROMs that are compatible with your version of MAME. To keep it simple, I'll leave a link where I got all of my ROMs. It'll be in the description below. The MAME software and ROMs are all on this site. Start by downloading MAME. Before you do anything with it, go to your C drive. Make a folder named Arcade Software. In that folder, make a folder named MAME. Open the downloaded MAME file and extract its contents into the MAME folder in your Arcade Software folder. Now go open the MAME folder. You'll see you have a folder named ROMs in there. Go back to the website I linked. Find mk.zip and download it. Do not unzip the file you downloaded. Just right-click it, copy, and paste it into the ROMs folder in your MAME folder. Repeat this process for any game you want on your arcade cabinet. Most of these games will not have a file name you recognize. For example, Killer Instinct is named kinst.zip. If you're unsure what a game is, just Google the file name, and that should help. This brings me to another tip. I'm sure some of you will want Killer Instinct on your cabinet. Killer Instinct is a game that requires more than just a ROM. The real arcade game has a hard drive in it, so you need a copy of that hard drive. That would require a CHD file. So you'll need to find a ROM file and a CHD file for certain games. There's a separate link for those CHD files in the description. They have the same name, just with a different extension. Both files go in the ROMs folder in the MAME folder. Now that you've got your games downloaded, go to the MAME folder, double-click the mame.exe file. This will open a very basic screen that should show you the games you've downloaded into your ROMs folder. Test it by opening a game. You'll see some error warnings that usually won't bug you again after you've cleared them. If the game is running normally, you've done it and we can move on. Now you should set up your motherboard to turn on after the power switch is turned on. This step is important so you can just flip your power strip switch on to turn on your whole cabinet. I'm inserting an older video that explains this step.
I do still want to show you how my computer starts just by turning on the power strip. This is a setting in your BIOS on your motherboard. You'll have to access these settings right when the PC is starting. Most motherboards will require you to press F2, F10, F12, or the delete button. Once you're in this menu, find the power management setting and change the option to make the computer start as soon as power is received. The wording may be a little bit different. You can see mine here on the screen, and that's what you want to go for. Check your PC or motherboard manual for how to do this if you're still having trouble. If you don't have either manual, look at your motherboard. You'll likely find the model number and you can just Google it.
If you've made it through all of these steps and everything seems to be working fine, I'd suggest moving on to modifying the cabinet. Start by ensuring your cabinet is unplugged. No one wants to get a little shock while doing this. Then move on to opening the back of your cabinet. Alright, so once you're inside, unplug this. Go ahead and remove that all together. Make sure it's unplugged from the wall too. Go underneath there, make sure you pull out the ribbon cable that connects your controller panel. There we go. Then take off these two screws here and here. There's one on each side. Once you've got those out, do not pull on this, of course. You need to come down here, remove these connections. Okay, unseat that one. This should come out pretty easily. If not, you might... let's see what happens. Okay. So just be gentle with it, of course. Now on here you have your ground wire connected to the board with a screw. I hope you can see that in there. I'm gonna pull that out. Okay, and that's it. Your original board is going to be out of there. You can put all that aside. You're not going to need that anymore. You do need these three connections though. Look at the model number on the back of your monitor. It's this number here. Check the description of this video. You should see that model number with a link to Amazon. Buy the video encoder board. It's very easy to install it. Get the ground wire. Your card should have included a little nut and screw. If not, you're going to need to find one that fits. Put the screw through the hole on the wire and then put it through this hole on the board. Then add the nut and tighten it up. I didn't make mine super tight, but snug enough that it wouldn't be loose. Then plug in this power cable. And lastly, get this cable, plug it in with the red wires to the left side of the connection. If you're unsure, be sure to take a close look at this video. Next, mount it somewhere inside the cabinet, but be sure not to mount it directly to the metal enclosure on your monitor. It will damage it. If you have enough slack in your cables, mount it to the wood just below the metal. If yours was like mine, take the box this card came in, use double-sided sticky tape and stick it to the back of the metal. Then use more double-sided tape or Velcro and stick the board to the box. It's ugly, but it's inside the cabinet and no one should see it. You're still going to use your original Arcade1Up power supply. I stuck mine to the wall of the cabinet with some double-sided tape. It's about midway up to keep it out of the way of the other components I'll be installing. Start by taking your controller off the cabinet. Remove these 4 screws and it should come right off. Start by taking these off. Lift up a little, pinch it. If you put them together, you probably know it comes off easily. Just unscrew them to the left. You don't need these necessarily, so toss them aside. Take off your plexiglass. Now try to keep from touching the inside of that, so put it off here. Then flip it over, remove this plastic cover. From there you can start unplugging all of the buttons from the board. Cut the zip ties holding the wires and start removing the buttons. These buttons will come out by pinching the 2 buttons on the sides, then push them through the top of the control deck. Repeat all of these steps until all of the buttons are removed. Next, take out the screws that are holding the joysticks to the deck. They are probably still going to be stuck by some glue. I just flipped my panel over, applied some pressure, and broke them free. On one of my builds, I had to use a rubber mallet to knock them out. You can remove the controller board, but leave the speaker if you plan to reuse it. If you're using the HAPP controls I linked to in the description, keep watching. If you're using Sanwa or some other kind, most of these steps will still apply. The joysticks will be a little bit different though. I can't offer a lot of help here, but I can say they should be a lot easier to install than the HAPP sticks. Moving on. This is just going to be the basics of this, that once you get this down, you're going to get it all no problem. You have your button, you have your micro switch, you have a collar. We're just going to put all these in right now. It'd be smart to have a picture of what the Mortal Kombat control panel looks like for reference, because you don't want to put these in wrong. You may think, I memorized where these go. Well, you're looking at it backwards, and you guys especially watching this are looking at it flipped and backwards. So, okay, so the high punch and low punch buttons are red, high kick, low kick are blue. So I'll start with this one since it's red. I'll do it from this side so you can see it. Drop it in the hole. Leave your micro switch aside for now, flip it back over, take this collar, let me hold it from the bottom. Okay, take this collar, you want to have this side down. It has a grip so it'll hang on to whatever you screw it down to. Put it on just like a nut basically. Screw it down, don't make it crazy tight just yet. You're probably going to need to readjust because you're going to put your micro switches in next. Now this is going to be a tough one for me to show you. Once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy, and they're easy to take out. So, here, these holes on the side line up with the holes here and here. So, I would start with this side, prong side facing down, put it in the hole on the side, then slide it back. It's going to get caught right here. You push this little piece out, push it all the way in, and now it's in place, and you can test it, you'll hear it, and you're good to go. Now to install the joysticks. This could be the hardest part of the build. You'll probably need someone to help you. Depending on which cabinet you're working with, you will probably have to cut some of the plastic mount off of the joystick. It's the part that will be on the underside. If you're installing them on a Street Fighter cabinet with a 6-button layout, you'll have to cut off the corners that will be near the buttons on each stick's mount. The mount is too large and would cover the button holes near the stick. There's no science to this, just line it up and mark it to where it needs to be cut, and use a Dremel or some similar tool to cut it off. Warning, there will be plastic bits that can be very hot and will be flying all around. Wear eye protection and do this somewhere you won't mind hot plastic bits flying around. It can stick to fabrics and carpet. It may even be wise to disassemble the stick housing to have more clearance. Again, do this part at your own risk. If you're modding the Mortal Kombat cabinet, you should only need to cut off a strip of the Player 1 stick's mount. You can see roughly how much I removed here. It just needs to be clear of the side wall of the cabinet. Measure twice and cut once is a great saying to remember here. You may be wondering why I use HAPP controls. The reason is, that is what was in the original arcade cabinets we all loved. They're excellent controls and worth the extra trouble if you ask me. If not, Sanwa sticks shouldn't require any modding but won't feel the same as a real cabinet. That choice is yours though. I will link to some Sanwa controls in the description. After you've prepared your sticks for installation, line up the joystick underneath the cabinet. Look through the front of the control panel. You should be able to eyeball it and make sure it looks centered. It will probably never be perfect, but get it as close as possible. If not, your sticks may rub the cabinet and that just wouldn't be good. This is where you'll need some help. Have someone hold them in position, as close to as centered as possible. Then you sink some screws in to hold it in place. I will show you the screw size I used on the screen. There's also a link to some on Amazon in the description. You may have removed some of your mounting holes when cutting. You can use the hole next to it or drill a new hole through the plastic. But be careful. Depending on which hole you sink the screws in, you may need different sized screws. I did use the one size and used the holes that were still there. I was careful not to go too deep, as to not stick it through the front of the control panel. It does matter which way you mount them. The longer sides should be up and down, with the thinner sides on the left and the right. After you've installed your stick mounts, it's time to put it all together. Place your controller's plexiglass on before putting the joystick through the top of the control panel. Place these parts on and put this clip in to secure it all. If you're unsure, read the little instruction sheet that should have come with the bag. After all of your buttons, joysticks, and micro switches are installed, we'll move on to installing the USB encoders and wiring them. On my original Killer Instinct build, I just used double-sided sticky tape, or actually I used Velcro. So I stuck a piece of Velcro here, stuck it to the board, put it on. That worked fine, but I've noticed when I have gotten back inside the cabinet to check on things, it is starting to fall off. I think the weight of the USB cord hanging off is pulling it down. So on this one, I used some of the little feet. I actually used the hole that was here, the thing that held that big plastic piece on over the original controls. So I used that hole to drill, and that screw. So one of those screws, you took off the plastic thing. But anyway, I used that hole, put that screw in there. It was perfect. I used one of the screws that comes in the bag of these little feet. So I used a 1/8 size drill bit. This hole did not work. I used this hole here, drilled it out, only very, very shallow. The screw doesn't go in very deep anyway, and of course you don't want to risk drilling through this 1/2 inch piece of wood and popping out the other side and ruining your art. So just know that you can do it. I'm only going to put the 2. It seems pretty sturdy. Be careful when you're pushing in the connections, maybe put some force underneath it, but other than that, I think it's good to go. All the buttons are in, all the micro switches are in. If you'll notice, I only put in one USB encoder board. I placed it here, I dropped it in the arcade to make sure it fits. I even plugged in one of these cords to make sure the front piece on the arcade does not pinch the cord or push it too bad. It doesn't, everything seems to be good. So we're on to wiring up player 1's side. The middle one is where you attach the red wire. So red on the middle, black on the bottom, top is unused. I'm going to interrupt here to say that I didn't realize they made HAPP specific USB encoders. The prongs on the HAPP micro switches are much longer than the little Sanwa buttons. The kit I bought is for Sanwa. The wire colors are different. They are white and blue. I couldn't get an answer from the seller, but judging from what I've seen in the photos, the white cable would go on the middle prong and the blue would go on the bottom. I would still recommend doing your own research, check the manual, email the seller if it doesn't say in the instructions. If I find the answer in the meantime, you'll find it down in the description. I'm going to link to both USB encoders. I'll specify which one is for which. Be sure to buy the right one depending on what button set you go with. If not, you'll have to modify every one of those metal clips. Red on that middle prong, black on the bottom. Top is left open. Then you just plug this into the board. When you're plugging in your joysticks, know that this is going to be backwards. Again, it doesn't really matter much as far as I can tell. You're going to assign each direction a button in MAME, but let's at least do it right for now just to save any confusion. So when you are pushing left on the joystick, when it's flipped over, this is it. So if you have it sitting like I do, left, right, up, down, everything is kind of backwards. So looking at your instructions, again, just do it for just the joysticks primarily, but we'll get to the buttons in a second. Left is going to be this slot here, second in from the right. That's if your USB port is on this side. And if you've mounted yours up like this on these plastic feet, know that pushing down on it might bend the board, so give it a little support underneath it. And just start wiring it all up. hopefully everything's gonna fit. The next input is the right switch, so grab another cord, plug it in, and these do matter which direction you plug them in, but you really can't plug them in wrong since they have those extra little bits right here. So, boom. The next one will be down. And if you end up using the HAPP joysticks where you had to cut off this side on the player one side, these prongs are going to stick out too far, so I've bent them in just with my fingers. So you may have to even push a little bit on this, bend it in a little more, and that should be able to clear the side of the cabinet when you put it in. Other than that, everything else should fit perfectly. Okay, now the rest of these buttons are going to be installed on this bottom row, and that's the side with the most inputs on it. It says it starts from this side is 1, 2, 3, counts up, so that's how we're going to wire them. You might want to start with a plan on how to wire these. First off, make sure everything fits. So since your farthest button is going to be, if you mounted it right here, your farthest button is going to be the start button. It looks like it's all going to fit perfectly, but I would put the start button last just to make sure it fits nicely. So I would do, this is how I'm going to do it. I cannot remember how MAME maps it, but we'll figure it out when we do the setup. I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So let's start with high punch, which will be plugged in on the number 1 spot. Put the red in the middle, black on the bottom. Okay. I know MAME maps the buttons in a really weird fashion, so I'm sure this isn't going to make a lot of sense once we're doing it. I'm not even going to obsess over it. I'll have a guide for you guys. So if you're watching, by the time we get to the point of mapping the buttons, hopefully I'll be able to overlay something on the screen, or I'll be very clear about it when we do it. Wire the second player buttons and joysticks the same way. It will be helpful to have them the same way when you're mapping the buttons in the game. Be careful where you place the USB encoders. If you're screwing them into the control deck, double check that they'll fit inside the cabinet before wiring everything up. Now you need to drill out some holes for a coin button to give games credits, and you need a button to exit emulation and return to your games list. I have linked to the drill bit you need. You can use your old Arcade1Up buttons for this, or you can order some black buttons like I did. It's a personal preference here. I chose to drill mine through the panel right under the control panel. I don't recommend drilling them through the control deck because you'd then have to drill holes through the plexiglass, which may break. Keep a few things in mind when you're drilling the holes. You have to make sure the buttons will fit under your current buttons. HAPP buttons are long and stick out far underneath. I drilled my holes a little lower than center. Don't go too low to ensure your wires can reach the encoder board. I'll include my measurements on the screen. Mark the center of where your holes will be and drill them out, using a 1 1/8 inch drill bit. Install your buttons in the holes. Then wire the micro switches to your encoder board, but wait to put the micro switch in the button until you've got the buttons in place. It will make it much easier since the cords are so short. Don't forget to plug your USB cables in before installing the controller deck on the cabinet. It would be smart to mark the USB cables as player 1 and player 2 just so you know which are which. You can install the micro switch in the button from the back of the cabinet. You might be able to fit your whole PC case inside. I couldn't, so I chose this route. Now it's time to remove your motherboard. Be certain your PC has been unplugged from the wall. Maybe press the power button to get rid of any extra electricity that may be in your power supply. First, if you're not familiar with working on PCs, take a photo of all the connections before unplugging things. Now start removing the hard drive and power supply from your PC case. It's very possible yours will be different from mine. A typical case looks like this inside. Start by unplugging all of your connections, power cables from the board, leave your CPU fan's power cable on, remove all of the ribbon cables or SATA hard drive connections, unscrew the screws holding your motherboard to the case. Once you've found and removed them all, gently lift your motherboard out of the case. Once that's done, unscrew the screws holding your hard drive in, slide it out and set it somewhere safe. Unscrew the power supply. Typically they're held on by 4 screws on the back of the case. You're now ready to mount the motherboard in the cabinet. This is where you have another choice. I chose to cut a piece of wood that I would mount the motherboard to. That way I could remove it from the cabinet easier if needed. I cut a piece of plywood slightly larger than the motherboard on all sides. Then grab your bag of mounting feet and start screwing them into the board. I left the feet sticking out of the board so I could screw the feet to the wood. From there you can put it in your cabinet. In my Killer Instinct cabinet, it just sits on the floor of the cabinet. In my Mortal Kombat cabinet, it had to be laid out differently because of the slack in the power supply's cables. I mounted it to the wall of the cabinet using 2 of the wood screws I used to mount the joysticks. Be very careful not to screw them in too far. Depending on the type of wood you have, it may be a different thickness. If you screw them in too far, it could stick out of your cabinet's sidewall. The last steps will be to connect everything to the motherboard. Use the photo you took earlier if you're unsure where everything went. You should only need the motherboard, power supply, and hard drive. Your board may have a separate 4-pin power connection for the CPU. Plug that in if you do. Then plug in the SATA or IDE cable to your hard drive. Connect a power cable to your hard drive too. Get your external PC power button that I linked to in the description, and then connect it to your motherboard. It won't be obvious where to connect this. If you don't have a manual for your motherboard, Google the motherboard's model number. Find the front panel connections, specifically where to plug in the power switch. I stuck my hard drive to the wall of the cabinet using Velcro. I chose Velcro so I could remove it at a later date if it failed, or if I need to service anything inside. I also stuck the power button to the top of the cabinet. I chose this location so I could still fit my speakers up there. Now it's time to install your speakers or your amplifier. I chose to go with a new set of speakers, PC speakers to be more specific. I wanted more bass. I like to feel the sound radiate through the cabinet while I'm playing. I linked to a decent set of Logitech speakers in the description. I use these on my Mortal Kombat cabinet. They have decent sound and bass for this size cabinet. I placed the subwoofer inside, used some Velcro tape to stick it to the wall. I just did that in case I need to move the cabinet. I don't want everything falling all around. I used some Velcro to stick the speakers to the top of the cabinet. If you do it just right, you shouldn't see them from the front, unless you're really tall. Run the wires down the cabinet and tuck them back inside. Then plug everything in. Now if you're going to use the original speaker, buy an amplifier like the one I linked to in the description. This one should be easy to install. Mount it to the wall of your cabinet near the speaker. Cut the tip of the speaker connection off at the plastic side, and plug those 2 wires into the amplifier. Then get a 3.5mm audio cable and plug it in from the amplifier to the sound port on your motherboard. Finally, connect all of the components. Your monitor cable from the PC to the board on the back of the monitor. The USB cables from your controllers. Temporarily plug in all of your power cables to the power strip and plug in your speakers to the motherboard. It doesn't have to be pretty, this should be a test phase. Make sure everything works and we'll clean it up at the end. Turn it on and let's move to setting up your controls in MAME. Now it's time to set up the controls in MAME. You need a mouse and keyboard for this step. Also, be sure your USB encoders are plugged into the motherboard before starting. The PC may need to be connected to the internet to install the drivers automatically. Once that's finished, go to your MAME folder on your C drive in the arcade software folder, double-click the MAME.exe file, and start with your first game. Once the game boots up, press Tab on your keyboard, scroll down to Input this game, and press Enter. Here you'll see all of the controls you need to assign buttons to. You won't need to assign them all, just the ones that apply to you. In this case, Player 1 Start is the first input I need to assign. Press Enter on the input, then press the button you want to assign it to. Repeat these steps until you're finished. If you followed my button scheme and added the coin button to the front, be sure to map coin 1 to that button on each game. Interruption here. To map the Mortal Kombat buttons can be quite confusing. I'm going to show you how it is. Button 1, high punch. Button 2, block. Button 3, high kick. Button 4, low punch. Button 5, low kick. And button 6 is going to be run. Once you're finished, test all of the controls on each player. If everything seems right, press escape on your keyboard and move to the next game. Repeat all of these steps with each game you have. Some games will have complicated button layouts that will require trial and error. It will be frustrating, but keep working with it and you'll get it right. Now we're going to set up your front-end software. Front-end software is what will give you a graphical interface to launch your games. I use Maximus Arcade. It's not flashy and pretty, but it's simple and very easy to set up. It does cost $4.99 to buy a license, but you can try it for free for 30 days. Download the file, extract it to your arcade software folder on your C drive. Open the Max 2.10 folder. Open the front-end folder and double-click Preferences. When that's open, click the Configuration tab. Select MAME from the drop-down box. Then below that, point the software to your MAME.exe file. Then point to the ROMs folder, which is in your MAME folder. If you want screenshots and marquee art to show up on the little arcade on the screen, find the files on Google, name them the exact same name as the ROM for the game you're trying to make them appear to. For example, if you want Mortal Kombat to have a Mortal Kombat marquee, name the marquee file mk.jpg.whatever the extension is. Be sure to place the screenshots in a folder that you've named Screenshots, and then make a separate folder named Marquees so you can put your marquee images in there. Again, name the marquees the exact same name as the ROM. Then point to these folders as seen on the video. Quick tip, the larger the photo files, the longer they'll take to load. Find smaller images or resize them before putting them into the folder. Your games should all load. You can test them by launching MAME and test all of your button inputs. Then click Display Order and click Delete All. Then on the left side, find MAME and click Add. It should be the only thing in the right box. Now we need to set up your front-end software to read your arcade controller's inputs. Click Controller, then Set Up 1, and then start by removing all of the inputs by clicking in each box and clicking this Delete button. After that, click in the Up box, press Up on your joystick, and move on to do the same for the rest of the directional controls. You can skip these options if you're only using MAME. For Select, click in the box and press any and all of the buttons you'd like to use to select a game. If you want just one button to select a game, press that button. If you want several buttons to select a game, keep pressing buttons and it will continue to add them. Be sure to assign a Quit Executable button. This should be this button if you built your cabinet like mine. This will stop emulation and go back to the games list. After that, if you'd like to test it out, just close the Preferences window and open the Maximus Arcade exe file. I'm going to insert an older video of mine showing you how to make your PC start Maximus Arcade at startup. This is so you don't need to have a mouse and keyboard handy when the arcade starts up. This tip will work with just about any front-end software, and you can even just have it launch MAME. The first step is find your startup folder. On Windows 7, you click the Start button, go to All Programs, then go to Startup and right-click it, and choose Explore. Leave that window open, click Start, Computer, then go to your C drive or whatever location your front-end software is located in. You'll need to find the frontends.exe file, which is the icon you click to launch the software. Once you find it, right-click and create a shortcut. Copy that shortcut and paste it into your startup folder. That's it. You can then restart the PC and make sure it worked. If you've made it to this point, it's time to button up this cabinet. It probably looks like a mess inside, so let's clean it up. Get your power strip. I linked to one in the description that I used on both builds. It has a long cable and 6 outlets. I used Velcro to stick it to the wall of the cabinet. Pay attention to where you'll want it. I did mine like this so I could reach around the back of the cabinet and just flip the switch. It's as far back as I could get it. Once you've mounted it, grab a tape measure and see where you'll need to drill a hole in the back of your cabinet door. This hole will allow you to reach in and turn the power off and on in your cabinet. Measure twice and then drill your hole. I used a large drill bit. I'll link to one of the same size in the description. I also drilled another hole for the power cable to come out of the back. Keep in mind it has to be large enough to fit the plug through initially. Again, I'll link to the size I used below. I linked to this fan I used to cool the PC in the description. If you use that same fan, install it now. I use zip ties to tie the feet of this fan to the piece of wood. Ideally, air would blow out of the cabinet, but this setup has worked well for me on my other cabinet. I've run the Killer Instinct cabinet with a PC in it for well over 200 hours now, and it's not overheated yet. This fan plugs in via USB. Your motherboard can power it, or you can use a power brick. I linked to one of those in the description too. I personally prefer not to add any more stress to my power supply, especially if it's a cheap power supply that came stock with a computer. So I use an external power brick. Now grab some zip ties and group together some of your cables to make it look cleaner. From here you can put your cabinet's back panel on. Fire up your cabinet and make sure everything works. If you followed all of my instructions successfully, your cabinet should turn on with the flip of the power strip switch. Boot right into Maximus Arcade and be ready to play. No keyboard and mouse should be needed. When it comes to shutdown, you should only need to press the PC button on top of your cabinet. Wait for it to shut down and then flip off the switch in the back of your cabinet. There are nicer ways of doing this, but this is how I did my cabinets. I do have a tip for you. Don't leave your cabinet connected to the internet. This sounds weird these days, but leaving it connected to the internet leaves it open for things popping up and messing with gameplay. If it's not connected to the internet, it can't look for updates that may interrupt your game, and it's not vulnerable to viruses and should run smoothly. Should you need to connect it for service, leave an Ethernet cable sticking out of the back. I linked to a great cable I used on both cabinets. It comes with a Velcro tie to keep it neatly tucked in the back. I just ran it through the power cable hole. Now I just plug it into a port when I need to access the internet. Since I didn't want a keyboard and mouse attached to my cabinets, I installed TeamViewer to remotely access it when it's connected to the internet. That's optional, but it works very well for me. If you've made it this far, I applaud you. You probably ran into some issues along the way, and that's normal. It took me 3 days of several hours a day working on my Mortal Kombat cabinet. Even though that was my second build, I still ran into weird things that I needed to work out along the way. There's always going to be something you don't really expect. In my case, it took me extra time just to figure out where to mount the motherboard because the cables were so short on my power supply. Things don't always go smoothly, but don't be discouraged. It's worth it in the end. You now have a really cool MAME arcade cabinet in your house that you can play nearly any arcade game you want to on it. It's such a nice thing once it's finished. Hopefully you'll love every minute of playing afterwards. And your friends will be extremely jealous when they see you've got this new setup. I really hope this helps some of you mod your cabinet. Please let me know what your experience was like in the comments. Hopefully this was informative. If it was, please give these videos a thumbs up, share it with friends, and subscribe for more Arcade1Up tips and tricks in the future. Thanks for watching.